Hi everyone, Plastic EP here from Melbourne, Australia. I've got my very special guest, Jude Southerland Kessler from Shreveport in Kentucky. How are you today, Jude?
I am doing wonderful, but I'm from the great state of Louisiana where we let the good times roll.
That's fantastic. Now, I believe you got some books signed to Plastic EP.
You know I have plastic. I would not ever forget you. I
Thank
have
you.
your first edition copy of Should Have Been There, and Astrid Kirscher was kind enough to let me use her picture of John for the cover. So you are getting that. We did not do very many of these with the photograph edges around it. And here's your copy. I have it all signed and ready to go
Can
out.
we bring that closer? Can you bring that closer to the screen? Yeah, bring it a little bit more.
There we go.
That's fantastic. Can you read that out to everybody out there?
Yeah, Jude, it should have been there. The biography on the life of John Winston Lennon, and I signed it Jude Southerland Kessler, and it was signed to you in the strange and bizarre year of 2020 on the 4th of June. Now, I did not inscribe it. I'm going to tuck a special note to you into the book because the books sell out very quickly, and there are only 3 copies of this left, and they're all first editions, and so these books are very, very valuable. We just sold one. I didn't, but on the secondary market, it sold for $900 last week. So it's better if you just sign and date them rather than put a description in it.
The second book you've signed for me, which is that one?
And the second one is the latest volume. This is volume 4, Should Have Known Better. This is a first edition also, and I do have about 38 copies, 36 copies, something like that of this book left. But again, it's selling out very quickly, and I have it signed again. Let's see if I can line it up. There we go. Bring it in.
That's fantastic. Can I ask, has Charles Rosenet bought some copies?
Oh, yeah. Charles Rosenet used to sit next to me at the Fest for Beatles fan for years, and I'm good friends with him and his family and his daughter who wanted to be a writer. I don't know what by now she's probably in at least high school, so I hope she did turn out to be a writer. And yes, he has copies of all of the books.
I got to say a big hello to him, and you too, Jude, because he's on now. He just sent you a message.
Oh, hey, Charles. Love you, Charles, and your sweet family. Get in touch with me so I can hear about your daughter and how she's doing.
And you know, the great thing is, from the first episode we've done, and this is now our second, we're going to go into everything about the Beatles. I got to use the expression, hey, Jude. Because you're the only person I know that's Jude, and you're the only person I can say, hey, Jude.
There we go. There we go. When I started publishing these books, all of my friends from high school on had always called me Jude, and my husband calls me Jude. And there was another Judith Kessler who had already written many books. And I said, what am I going to do? And my husband said, well, everybody calls you Jude. That's what you need to use for your pen name. And so there we go.
I got to say, that's the best promotion you can have. And Charles has just said that his daughter has just graduated from college.
Oh, my God. Time flies so
He's my co-host. I'm always reading these emails. He comes on every interview I got. The guy just comes up from nowhere. I love him so much. He's just great.
We met at the Kansas City Beatle Fest in 1993, and we have known each other a long, long time. And if I were going to go to Liverpool and London, I would go with Charles Rosenet's tours. This is not an ad. This is from my heart. Charles knows everyone, and he knows London and Liverpool like the back of his hand. And he knows all the stories. He would make it special for anyone. He really would.
I also got to say, Jude, he's got that special event happening for John Lennon, and he sent me all the details about it. And I think everyone should go to that. That's celebrating John's 80th birthday. That's called Remember Lennon.
Yeah, coming up in October. And I know Charles will work it out so that we can all wear our masks and social distance and, you know, all of that, because it's so important right now. I just heard today the countdown from 10 to 1 on what is most dangerous and least dangerous for people to do right now. And of course, large gatherings are the most dangerous. So I know Charles is busy dotting every I and crossing every T so that people can go to this and be absolutely 100% safe.
I just got to say what it is, right? It's called Remember Lenin, Imagine 80, right? It's Friday, the October the 9th, 2020, Norwalk Concert Hall, 125 East Avenue, Norwalk, CT, which means I take a Connecticut. Would that be right?
That's right.
Right. And I want you all to go to the website after we do this episode, www.rememberlenin1word.com. It's got capital for the R and a capital for the L. So go to that website, check it out, because it's going to be one of the major events there. And you never know who's going to turn up to that event.
It's going to, you never know, huh?
You never know. You never know.
Woo! That sounds interesting. Well,
That's a hint. No one knows who's going to turn up to that, but I can tell you, it's definitely not me because they won't let us fly out of Australia. We're not allowed to fly out of Australia. I don't know if you know that.
I would love for it to be me. I would love, love, love it.
So that's a problem there. Now, what's the third book? What's the third book you got to show me? So we've done 2, yeah?
Where She Loves You, and I do not have any more copies of this book, but all of these books are available on every single ebook format, Nook, Kindle, any ebook format. So whatever you use, you can get the books. And any iPhone, any iPhone has a free Kindle app. Doesn't cost a penny. And you can get the books for $9.95 if you just get the app. Really, it's kind of a cool thing, Plastic, because when you get to a footnote, and there are 4,000 footnotes in these books. So when you get to one, you touch it with your finger. And when you touch it, all the information from the footnote comes up. You read the extra info that's associated with that sentence, touch it again, and it disappears, and you read on. So it's pretty cool to do it on the ebook.
You know, Jude, I got to tell you, now, it took you 35 years to write the 4 books. That's true, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, I take my hat off to you, and I mean this sincerely. The work that you put into these books, and I know they're your life work, because 4 books in 35 years, to me, is amazing. And you're doing the 5th book now. When do you think the 5th book's going to be out?
5th book will be out in a year and a half.
Okay, so good. By then, we'll still be going through the episode, so we'll be okay. And I'm reserving my copy for that now before Charles.
I love it. I love it. Well,
if you don't start,
a copy for sure.
Sorry, I missed that.
You will get a complimentary copy for sure, and I will.
You're so kind. I love these episodes. Did you hear that, Charles? I'll get that one for free. You know what I like? I don't know if you saw my show yesterday with Chachi LaPrette. It was Chachi's big Beatles surprise package. I sent him a package full of records, my personal collection, right? Like Australian singles and EPs. And that's a great show. I think I sent it to you. If I didn't, I'll send you that show.
I'll share it. I love Chachi. Was the very first radio show I was ever on. And I was so nervous. I run 4 miles every other day. And I never perspired the way I did when I was on Chachi's show. I was so nervous. And he, as you know, he is the nicest person and sweet and kind. And he made it so easy. But I never forget how nervous I was that first time to do his show.
Well, Jude, what we're going to do is we're organising things. Chachi and I, what I'll do is I don't want to tell Chachi, but I'll invite you on the show when I'm doing the show with him. He's not to know. And you'll just appear. That's what we're going to do.
Oh, good. That'd be great. Oh, I just love him. He is the sweetest person. I used to have a show called the John Lennon Hour, and we had all sorts of people on. I mean, we've had, the biggest of the big, like Dennis Ferrante, who was John's record producer at one time. And we've had Gary Van Syok from Elephant's Memory Band. And We had lots of people, but the biggest audience I ever had was when I had Chachi on the show, because everybody loves Chachi LaPrade. They love him.
Well, they all like Charles. They love Charles too. And what I'll do is I'll get Charles on too as a surprise, because that guy, he's a live wire. I love the guy. All right, now today we're going to be talking about the 11th of February, and what we're going to do is we're going to break it up into two shows. So we're going to talk now today about part one. So that's the day they actually record for 12 hours the Please Please Me album. Is that correct?
Absolutely right. The 11th of February, 1963.
Now, this is the Australian copy, which is very hard to get, right, that came out in 63, Australian. And the vinyl is very heavy, to tell you, Jude. It's very heavy and very hard to get. And you can see the label there. That's hard to get. And when you play this on a record player, because of the weight back then in 63, you're hearing something really superb. And to tell you, it's my favorite album. So you've got Plastic EP's 1000% listening. So let's kick off the show, Jude. Let's talk about that first 6 hours on the 11th of February, 1963. Here we go.
Well, I could not have written this chapter, which is a 33-page chapter that takes you almost second by second through the day, without two extraordinary people. Of course, Mark Lewison and his Beatles recording sessions, always the guru, always the go-to guy. But I was also very blessed to have the transcript from that day in studio, translated word for word by John C. Wynne, who did the book Way Beyond Compare. John C. Wynne writes down every single word that they say. So my dialogue is the actual dialogue that they spoke in studio, thanks to this wonderful, wonderful book, Way Beyond Compare. Then I had the personal help of Richard Langham. Richard was a young engineer on that day. He was the second engineer, which means he's the guy that was responsible for queuing up the tape, writing down the titles of the songs, rewinding, letting George Martin listen, getting the tape ready to go, pushing the button. He was the one that was doing all that hands-on kind of work, and he saw everything that happened. So he took my chapter, went through it, and said, "This is wrong. Where did you get this?" I said, "Well, Paul said in the anthology that they came in through the tradesman's entrance." He goes, "There's no such thing as the tradesman's entrance. Take that out." And then I had everybody wearing lab coats, white lab coats for this job, blue lab coats for this job. He goes, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Well, that was in George Martin's All You Need Is Ears." He goes, "No, nobody was doing that. That was back in the 1950s. By 1963, the lab coats were a thing of the past. Take that out." He corrected so much, worked with every single paragraph, and made it right because he was there. So without Richard Langham, there is no way that this book, this is the second book, Shivering Inside, which is 1961 to 1963, no way I could have done it without his help. He was also there the day that the Beatles recorded From Me to You. It's same thing. He took that chapter and was like, "No, that's wrong. No, that's wrong." He goes, "Why are you calling Norman Smith Norm?" I was like, "Well, I just assumed that they would abbreviate it to Norm." He goes, "Norman Smith didn't let anyone call him Norm. Take that out." So really is good to have someone who is there correcting everything. One of the first things he corrected is I was calling the recording studio Abbey Road. And he went, "Oh, no, nobody called it Abbey Road. You Beatles fans today call it Abbey Road Studios because it was made famous by the Abbey Road LP. And now, in retrospect, you call it Abbey Road Studios. Back then, all of us called it EMI. That's what we called it, EMI Studios. Even though Parlophone is the label that the Beatles were recording on, the Parlophone label, that's a subsidiary of EMI, which is Electrical and Musical Industries. That's what EMI stands for. And everybody referred to it as EMI. Of course, they were in Studio 2. They were almost always in Studio 2, rare occasions when they weren't, but almost always in their familiar Studio 2. And they've come in as on a break from the Helen Shapiro tour. They have gotten the chance of all chances, this young fledgling band, to travel with Helen Shapiro, who was a big hit. In 1961, she had 2 #1 hits. Walking My Way Back to Happiness was a big #1 for her. Her very first song was Don't Treat Me Like a Child, which reached #3. You know how old she was when she recorded that?
14?
That's right.
Can I
14.
just say something, Jude? Is it true that on the bus, they wrote the song Misery and they wanted to give it to her? They specifically wrote that song Misery to give to her. That's correct or not?
That's correct. And that's what we'll open our next show with, because Misery will be the first song that we talk about when we do part 2 of this show. But yes, Paul and John wrote it for her specifically, and her manager, Nori Paramore, didn't think it was appropriate for her. And so when they record on the 11th of February, 63, when about midway during the day, and that's where we'll pick it up next week, the very first song they're going to record in part 2 is Misery. And of course, it was a great song. Too bad she didn't record it, but Nori Paramore didn't think it was appropriate. So you'll notice that I call this Please Please Me an LP. And in 1963, no one said the word album unless you were referring to what an artist carried in his hand to take in to someone to present himself for appraisal, his art album. Records, long playing records, were not referred to as albums. And Richard Langham corrected me on this pretty severely. He's like, you need to call it what it was. It's called an LP. So a long playing record, an LP is what they used. So the Beatles had taken this break from the Helen Shapiro tour. They had arrived in London the night before. They stayed at okay, not so nice. Remember, they're not rich. You know, they're still very unknown. And they stayed at a kind of a low-priced hotel in Chelsea. It is the coldest winter in England's history in 25 years. It's a bitterly cold, sub-zero winter. The boys have been on a drafty tour bus with everybody else, like Kenny Lynch and the whole group that's on this Helen Shapiro tour. They've been going into theaters and music halls. I'm sure no one's wiping off the door handles. There's bacteria and viruses everywhere, and they're sick. They are very sick. Paul is coughing. He has throat lozenges. John's running a high temperature. He has a silver tin of Zubes, Z-U-B-E-S lozenges that he keeps on top of the piano. His throat is burning. It's killing him. And he thinks that the way to cure that is to gargle milk, not knowing that putting a milk product on your throat is probably the worst thing you could do because it creates mucus when you do that. He doesn't know that. He thinks it works. And George Martin says, if he thinks it works, let him do it. Whatever psychologically works for him, let him gargle milk. So you'll see that during the day, he's doing that. Now, the Beatles, as we all know, in Hamburg, stay up all night, party all night, sing all night, fall into bed around 6 a.m., and they get up around noon, 1 o'clock. Well, not anymore, because they have to be in EMI by 10 a.m., dressed, breakfasted, ready to work at 10 a.m. They roll in. And before John got there, he made it a point to dial 052-428-4302 in Liverpool, which is Mimi's number. That's Mimi, his Aunt Mimi's home where he grew up. And he doesn't want to speak to Mimi. He gets her off the phone almost immediately. He wants to speak to the beautiful blonde who is living there with Mimi, who is pregnant, very pregnant, and who is about to have John's baby, his wife, Cynthia. He wants to talk to Cynthia. Before every big event at this point of John's life, he had to call and be calmed down by Cynthia. So he calls her and says, I'm sick, I'm running fever, I'm shaking, I'm shivering, I'm not going to be able to do this. And she says, of course you can do it, John. You used to perform on no sleep. You couldn't see what you were doing. You didn't wear your contacts. You didn't wear your glasses, but you got up on stage and no matter what, you performed like a pro. You've got this. And he goes into EMI, buoyed up by the love of this girl that he absolutely adores, believing that the show must go on. Now, we all know that the Beatles already have 4 shows in the can because they've had 2 singles. In October of 1962, they released Love Me Do, and its B-side, P.S. I Love You. It didn't go to number 1, but it did really chart, and the Beatles got their names out there. And John was secretly tickled about this, I hate to say, because Love Me Do had always been John's song. If you heard it in the Cavern Club, John was the one singing it. But when they got ready to record it, he also plays the harmonica. And so they go, love, love me. And he plays the harmonica, and the other Beatles sang the word do. And George Martin said, you are not going to have a song called Love Me. Wah! You're not doing that. Paul's going to sing it. And Paul doesn't want to sing it because it's too high pitched for him, and he's going to really struggle with it. But George Martin puts his foot down, makes Paul sing it. So secretly, John is a little bit pleased that it doesn't go to number 1 because, of course, as the leader of the band and the one that formed the band, he wants to sing the first number 1. And he does that in January of 1963, exactly 30 days, 1 month before they start to record the Please Please Me LP. They release his single, Please Please Me, with its B-side, Ask Me Why. And yes, it goes to number 1, and John is the first Beatle to capture a number 1, and he's pleased. So those 4 songs are in the can. They're done. The Beatles don't have to record those again that day. So
I just got to say, when he went in there, first of all, with the Please Please Me song, how do you do it? That was record. He found the song, George Martin for the Beatles, and said, this is going to be a hit. It's called How Do You Do It? And they said, we're not going to do that song. We're not taking that to Liverpool, and people are going to laugh at us doing that song. So he said to him, okay, you come up with something better. You come up with a number 1. So when he did Please Please Me, I just want to say, that was a slowed down version, like a Roy Orbison style song when he first sang it to him. And George Martin said, speed it up.
Yeah. And
that's what they did.
Absolutely. George Martin had so much to do with the success of the Beatles. Love Me Do was their first, and he wanted them to sing a song called How Do You Do? How do you do?
Yeah, that's the one.
Which became a hit later on. And they did not, that's like you said, they said, we can't go back to Liverpool with a fruitcake song like that. They'll laugh us out of the place. There's no way. We're going to do our own song. And he thought the audacity of these Burks from Liverpool to tell me that they're going to do their song instead of a professional Tin Pan Alley song that I know will be a hit. How dare they? But of course, they were right. And Love Me Do did fairly well. Please Please Me, as you said, was a slower version. They did speed it up. You know, he said so many things to them, like From Me to You. At the beginning of the song, they were playing the da 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 dum dum da. They were playing that, and he said, "No. You're going to sing that." And they're like, "What? You're going to sing that as the intro? It's going to be unique and different, and it's going to be catchy." And of course, George Martin was right. And you're going to see many times during this session today when he advises them to do things. Sometimes they do it. Sometimes they don't, but he had a real gift. Of course, he went to the Guildhall School of Music, and he knew what he was doing, and he was so perceptive and so right so many times. So the morning they come in, they've got these 4 songs in the can. They only have 1 day to make an LP. You think about people like Drake or Celine Dion or Beyonce, they take a year and a half to make an LP. They go into studio, they tweak it, they work with it, they re-record it multiple times. The Beatles have 1 day. 1 day.
12 hours? 12 hours, was it? Or 14?
Right. That's right. Hours. That's it. That's exactly right. That's all they've got. And it's crucial that they release this LP at this point. Brian needs them to do it because he wants to send them out on tour. And in order to make the tour successful, they're going to tour with Roy Orbison. And in order to send them out in June with Roy Orbison, they've got to have some hit songs to merit that kind of a recording star's presence. So they go in and they got those 4 songs. And George Martin says to them, he sits down on his high 3-legged stool that he has. He's got his white shirt sleeves on, his tie, and he says to them, what do you have that we can record quickly? And John answers and says, well, we've 4 originals and we've our stage show. I mean, it's been well rehearsed, hasn't it, over the last 2 years or more. And so Martin says, okay, that's what we're going to do. You've got those 4 originals. We'll record those. And then we're going to do your stage show. Because George Martin's original concept for this LP was to go up to Liverpool to set up the recording equipment in the Cavern Club where they had performed 300 some odd times and do the show live in the Cavern Club. But when George Martin goes up to Liverpool and sees how humid it is, how muggy it is, how thick the air is, all of the limestone cavern dandruff falling off the ceiling into the equipment, the echoes, the reverberations in the room, he's like, we can't do it in the Cavern Club. But I still want it to sound extemporaneous. So yes, we're going to do your cover songs that you did on the Cavern stage. And here's the thing that I want to stress to you boys. I don't want it to be perfect. I don't want you to sing it perfectly. I want you to sing it as if it's a stage performance. Make mistakes, sing the wrong line, muck it up a bit because it needs to sound like a stage performance. And so they're ready to roll with that in mind. They ask if they can do a warm-up song because they just need to kind of get their fingers warmed up, get the throats warmed up. And George Martin says, sure, what do you want to do? And they say, well, I guess we'll do the song that we use for our customary show opener, and that's Some Other Guy. So Some Other Guy at 10:15, they kick off Some Other Guy. And George Martin, up in the recording booth, up those stairs above Studio 2, he and Norman Smith, the first engineer, are listening. When they finish singing Some Other Guy, they say to them over the 1MC, the microphone, which sounds down below, the bass got a bit lost. So, Paul, we need to beef up your bass a little bit. And then they say, now, George, your Scouse accent, your heavy back of the throat, nasal Scouse accent is drowning out the accents of the other boys. All we can hear is you when you're singing. So we're going to turn your microphone down a little bit so that we can hear John and Paul equally when they're singing. And so they make that adjustment. 10:20, they are ready to roll. They've got 12 hours and 25 minutes ahead of them at this point. Neil Aspinall with his suit on. All the boys, of course, are in suits, white shirts, and very tight ties, except for John, who is always loosens his tie a little bit in quiet rebellion. And Neil Aspinall is sitting there in his suit. He is one of their 2 roadies, Mal Evans, of course, being the other one. Neil's leaning against the wall. He's got his arms folded, according to Richard Langham. He's very tall. He's thin. He looks a lot like George Harrison. And he was the best friend of Pete Best, was dear friends with Pete. But when Pete was removed from the band and he said, I'll quit and I won't work with the Beatles anymore, Pete said, no, you need to stay with these boys. They're going places. I want you to be with them when they succeed. Don't quit. And of course, Neil becomes legend. He becomes their dearest, trusted comrade, gets them out of a million scrapes. He's the one that knows how to get them out when girls are on top of them, smothering their car, crushing the entrances, threatening to kill the Beatles with their passion for them. Neil is the one that always devises an escape plan, whether they go out in an ambulance, in a laundry truck, they go through the basement of another room to get away and end up in another hotel and sneak out a door. It's all Neil's plan. And he's there. Well, John announces that the first original song that they're going to record of the day is There's a Place. There's a Place is an old song for John. He recorded it back in Hamburg during their first trip there in 1960. He recorded it at this place that the Beatles used to hang out called the Seamen's Mission. The Seamen's Mission was a place where they could go get a hot breakfast. It was right on the harbor. They could look out at the water and the boats clacking together, and it looked like Liverpool, and it made them feel less homesick. And there was a lady there who made their breakfast and kind of mothered them and gave them extra toast and extra hot tea. And there was a room off to the side in the Seamen's Mission where there was an old piano. It was very cold in there because they didn't run the heat during the day, only at night when the seamen were there. And so John would go into this cold, dark room, and he started writing a song about his love for his mother, Julia, whom he lost when he was a teenager. He lost her early on when he was about 4.5, when he went to live with his Aunt Mimi. His mother, for very complicated reasons, she was involved in another relationship with a man named John Dykins. John's father and mother had split up. And so she, with a lot of pressure from her father, Pop Stanley, left John to be reared by her sister, his Aunt Mimi. And he was desperate for his mother. For years, he wondered why she had left him, why she'd abandoned him. But when he was 15, they became best friends, best comrades, inseparable. She taught him to play guitar. She told him to form a band. She told him he had music in his bones and that he was destined to become great. And they were best friends. And then she was hit by a drunk driver and killed and taken from him a second time. And so he wrote this song about the fact that even though life weighed him down and he was always sad and he was always unhappy, there's a place where he could go when he felt low, when he felt blue. And it was his mind. And there's no time when he was alone because he thought of her. I think of you. I think of Julia. So it was a very emotional song for John to sing. He always struggled to get the lyrics right because, number one, John never could remember lyrics from day one on. When he sings on the top of the rooftop in the very last concert they have in Savile Row, and he's going to sing a complicated lyrical song, he has someone to get in front of him and to hold up the words on poster board because John never could remember the lyrics. So he struggles to get the lyrics right. And he's going to struggle on this day to get the lyrics right. I'm going to read from Shivering Inside a quick excerpt of the Beatles that day doing takes 1 through 4. So all the people that are listening to your wonderful show, Plastic, can get an idea of what it was like for the boys to record takes 1 through 4. John began, "There's a place," with a sandpaper rasp. In fact, his throat threatened to choke the word "there's" to death. But once hurdled, and once Paul joined him in a duet that failed to distinguish between their two beautifully blended voices, the song stood firmly on its own 2 feet. On the second take, John emotionally offered, "In my mind, there's no sorrow." But Paul responded, "Don't you know that it's so?" And George unfortunately warbled, "Don't you know that it's true?" And the recording halted in midstream. Third take, John's harmonica said it all. Not the brisk up-tempo instrument that you heard in Love Me Do. John's Hofner harmonica was eloquently plaintive. It wept. But this time, the bass and drums failed to echo one another, and George Martin ended the third attempt with 2 terse words. Once again. Fourth take. The beginning, "Theirs," was strong, a powerful intro, full of John's conviction. But when John sang, "And it's my mind," Paul offered, "And in my mind." The boys exchanged quick, uncomfortable glances, but they kept recording anyway. However, once rattled, they couldn't recover. And Paul muddled a line in the following verse as well, and the band called it quits. This is how it went through the day. One boo-boo after another, one misstep after another. On take number 7, Paul couldn't stand, his throat was killing him, and Paul coughed, so they had to stop. Take 8, Ringo floundered 1/3 of the way through the song. But take 9 was perfect. And 9 is John's special number. He was born on the 9th. In Liverpool, he died on the 9th. Sean was born on the 9th. He lived at 9 Newcastle Road when he came home from the hospital. He was always 9 everything. Take 9 was perfect. But at the very end of the song, on When I Feel Blue, Paul inadvertently played an A chord instead of a C sharp, and so they had to stop. Well, number 10, take number 10, turned out to be the one that they took. And here is how that went. But somehow the magic of take 9 hadn't completely vanished. And within seconds, John was once again singing. Not here live, but back again in the Hamburg Siemens Mission, sitting alone in that cold, deserted pub and singing his heart out to an imagined Julia. In his mind, she was there with him, always nodding encouragingly, smiling, hearing the words that he had penned for her all those months ago. When I'm alone, he belted out, I think of you, and things you do go round my head. And the 10th take was letter perfect. So they have one original song now in the can. They've got There's a Place, and it's 11 a.m. And it's Paul's choice this time about which song they're going to record. And he loves the song that he sings lead on, that he's showcased on, and he calls it 17. That's the name of it, 17. So they're getting ready to do an up-tempo rocker song, which we all know as
I saw her standing there.
Exactly. I saw her standing there. And George Martin reminds them, now, guys, you're getting really hung up in this first recording of There's a Place on getting every word right. You got to remember that imperfections tie you to the listeners, because every time that you miss a note, every time you miss a lyric, you're like them. You make mistakes, they make mistakes. You don't have to be without error, but what you do have to do is entertain. So keep that in mind. So Martin, as they're queuing the song up and getting ready to record it, says, and they can hear this over the microphone, he says to Norman Smith, you can record it, I'm sorry, to Richard Langham, you can record it as 17, but that isn't going to be the name of the song. We're going to change it. Well, John and Paul look at each other because obviously they like the title 17, but they're going to defer to what George Martin says. They're not going to name it that. They're going to do what he says, which is change the title. So on take 1 of the song, Paul is full of fire, but he says 1, 2, 3, 4, which is not what we're used to hearing him say. We're used to hearing him say, what, Plastic?
She was just 17.
Yeah, and he goes 1, 2, 3, 5. He says 5.
That's better. But I just got to say, Jude, so people know, once the album's done, it comes out. The first song on side 1 is I Saw Her Standing There. That's how important that song is, with a 1, 2, 3, 4 to introduce the album like we've arrived. That's how important this album is.
It's a pot boiler, and it is the one that really gets people up on their feet and loving that LP. But the first time when he sings it, he just says 1, 2, 3, 4. You can hear 4, not fire, which you hear later on. Well, in take 1, they mess up. Paul says, since I saw her standing there, and John says, when I saw her standing there. But remembering what George Martin just told them, they sing on. However, George Martin wants them to record it again. They're talking to each other about what they just did, saying how good it was. And, hey, that was pretty great. Yeah, I liked it. When the red light, the recording light comes on and they don't see it. So they're talking through the beginning of take 2. So George Martin says to them, you know, we're gonna do it again. But let me tell you what, I've listened to take 1 and it is excellent, just like you boys were saying when we started take 2. So from now on, we're only going to record what he calls edit pieces. These are little bits and pieces that we're going to patch on to take number 1. So take 3 is just them doing the last 3 lines of the song. That's it, just the last 3 lines of the song. And they do really well. And so once again, when the red light comes on to do take 4, they're talking and they miss the take on that, but they jump in really, really fast and they start singing on take 4. They're doing an edit piece. And Paul is so frustrated that they have missed the cue that he gets really mad and goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And when he does that fire, that is the piece that they edit on to take one because it has more gusto and more energy. And take one, of course, becomes the song that they use. At
Jude,
noon,
I just got to say,
yeah,
if I may, once the recording's done and they edit and put it all together, what George Martin does that's very clever, he actually speeds up the song a bit, doesn't he?
yes, he does. He absolutely does. Gives it that hot boiler feel to it. At noon, they're still working. They're not going to take a lunch break. They're still working at noon. And at noon, we hear Paul trying to talk to John about the lyrics. And he says, now, John, remember, in the first verse, it's she wouldn't dance. In the second verse, it's how could I dance? And in the third verse, it's I'll never dance. Don't forget that. And they're still talking about that at noon when the red light comes on for them to do take 5 and they miss it and they have to call it quits and start over. Take 6, John flubs the very thing that Paul was just talking to him about. He says she wouldn't dance in the second verse when he should have said, how could I dance? And so they call a halt right there. Between take 6 and take 7, John says, I can't go on any longer. My throat is killing me. I've got to have some hot tea. So they send out for tea. John drinks a little bit, gets that hot liquid on his throat, and then they do take 7. Now, interesting that you just mentioned about the speeding it up a little bit, because on take 7, they do speed it up, and Paul calls a halt to it. It says, that's too fast. I can't sing the lyrics if we're going to go that fast. And George Martin, I'm sure right then thinks we could speed it up a little bit in production, but we need to slow it down for them to sing it correctly. So they slow it down a bit. Take 8 is Ringo's blub. They're doing quite well, but when they get towards the end of the song, Ringo falls out of tempo. John, kind of irritated with him, says, what happened? And Ringo, I love the way he answers him because Ringo doesn't take anything off of anybody. Ringo's sweet. He's nice. He's wonderful. But when John tries to get on his case, he doesn't allow him to do that. So when John goes, what happened to him? Ringo goes, the same as what's happened to you all these times. I flubbed it. He's not going to take it off of him. They go on they go on to take 9. And I'll read you what happened when they do take 9. It is absolutely the best that they've done all day. As the clock ticked closer and closer to session's end and the lunch break, the PA once again crackled. Take 9, Norman Smith's crisp diction filled the room. Nallard, which in Liverpool terms means frustrated, angry. Nallard, Paul put his lips close to the microphone and went, 1, 2, 3, 5, he yelled, and the Beatles rallied their last vestige of energy to deliver a note-perfect take of 17. So they end up using take 9, and at that point, it is time, it's 1 o'clock, and it's time for a lunch break. So George Martin is very gracious. He offers for the boys to go with him on lunch break. He offers to take them to the Heroes of Alma pub where they can have, a pub lunch, a shepherd's plowman's lunch, or a cheese and, chicken, something for lunch, and have a couple of beers. And John says, but we'll stay and rehearse. Now that sets a precedent. From then on, the Beatles almost never take a lunch break. They work through lunch. If there is ever a group that has a work ethic, it's the Beatles. They don't take time off when they're recording. They don't fool around when they're recording. Much later, when you get up to 65, 66, of course, they're going to be using marijuana in studio. But that doesn't abate their work ethic. They stay and work. And anybody that wants to can go and take a break, but the Beatles never do. So Martin says to them, well, can I bring you anything back? And John says, yes, you can bring me some cold milk for my throat. There, the cold milk is getting ready to come into play. So from 1 to 2, the Beatles stay and work. They work and work and work and work on the songs that they're going to record in the afternoon. George Martin, Norman Smith, Richard Langham are gone. At 2 o'clock, Norman Smith and Richard Langham come back. George Martin isn't back yet. and they get the tape ready. They turn the lights on in the studio. They turned them off during the lunch break. The lights in the studio come on very, very slowly. They have to warm up, and they start off light, and then they begin to come back up to full volume. Richard Langham is upstairs in the booth, queuing up the tape, getting it ready. Well, when George Martin comes in, he asks if he can hear what they've done so far. So he's listening to what they're going to do. And John requests that they do a warm-up song again, since it's been an hour since they've really played anything. He says that they want to do one of the cover songs that they used to perform in Hamburg, and that's A Taste of Honey. That's going to be this first song that they're going to record that afternoon, and he wants to run through it one time for a warm-up song. So it isn't 2:30 until they really get down to work on Taste of Honey. Now, Paul had not wanted to record Taste of Honey. His choice was either Besame Mucho, which the girls swooned when he did. They love Besame Mucho. Or he wanted to do Marlene Dietrich's Falling in Love Again, which he could really ham it up on. He could really do a good job with that one. But let me read you what George Martin said to him. He did not want him to do either one of those songs. And this is what George Martin said to him. "You'll go over much better with A Taste of Honey, Paul," Martin assured him. "Your arrangement's unique. It's updated. And that background, that to-do-do, it's catchy. It's a better song, really. You just have to trust my judgment on this one, Paul." And the producer walked away before the persuasive bass player could offer rebuttal. So A Taste of Honey it was. Paul crooned, Ringo brushed the cymbals, and John, who had gargled milk, sang background, somewhat overpowering by the slathering of scouse that George Harrison poured into the sea chanty refrain. But even after hundreds of rehearsals on stages all over England and Hamburg, the song still required 5, 7, 10 takes to get it right. By 3 p.m., George Martin was eager to move on. He had had his taste of honey, and he needed something more substantial. So they're going to leave Taste of Honey, and they're going to move on at 3 o'clock to another original song, but they're not finished with it. They're going to have to come back later in the day and work on it some more. So even a song that they've done hundreds and hundreds of times required a lot of work to get it ready to go onto a record, and they'll come back to it. So it's 3 o'clock, and now it's John's turn to choose. And they ask him what song he wants to record, and he wants to do a song that's very special to him called Do You Want to Know a Secret? He's not going to sing it, of course. We all know who sings Do You Want to Know a Secret? George. But John has written it, and he's written it for his bride that he, at this point, loves so much. They've been going together for years. She is his heart. And he's written her a song about the fact that they've been married for 6 months, since August, and they know he can't take her with him on any of the things that they go to. Brian has forbidden her to travel with the Beatles. He can't talk about being married to her. All the press knows pretty much that he's married, but no one talks about it. She won't be unveiled as his wife for months yet. That's not going to happen until August of this year. So it's that she is secret. And he says, do you want to know a secret? You know, I love you. He's written this for her. They're living, when they're first married, in Brian Epstein's flat in Faulkner Street in Liverpool. Brian lets them live there free of charge. It's his wedding gift to them that they can live there free of charge. And they live there for quite a while until Cynthia almost has a miscarriage and loses her baby. And then she goes to live with Mimi. So there's someone to look after her and take care of her. But at the time that the song is written, they're living in Brian's flat. Now, this flat is the place that Brian takes his secret romantic tryst. So there's a double meaning to the song. Do you want to know a secret about this place where John's living as well? And of course, no one knows that Cynthia's pregnant. So do you want to know a secret also refers to the fact that John is getting ready to have his baby boy, Julian. So there's a lot going on. When you read in his own right, John's book or A Spaniard in the Works, John never writes on one level. He writes about symbolism, and there's hidden meaning in it. And this song has tons of hidden meaning. It is an amazing song. George Martin calls it the Beatles' male Shirelles song, because it does sound like the Shirelles. It's a male voices, but it's doing Shirelles mimic. It's a call and answer song, and John got that from Snow White, because in the song I'm Wishing in Snow White, which he grew up loving, he loved Snow White. They sing, I'm wishing, and the wishing well answers, I'm wishing for the one I love, for the one I love. It's a call and answer song, and it fascinated him. So he's written, Do You Want to Know a Secret, like that. There are tight harmonies, beautiful backing vocals. It is a great, great song. Now, people characterize John Lennon as a rock and roller, and without a doubt, he is. I mean, you can't write Ticket to Ride and Revolution without being a rocker. He's a rocker. But they sort of make it sound like Paul is the one that writes all the ballads and John is the one that writes all the rock and rollers. And that's not true. Paul writes rock and rollers, think Helter Skelter. And John writes ballads. And this is one of his earliest ballads. He writes many other beautiful ones like If I Fell and In My Life. And in his solo career, he becomes predominantly a ballad singer. This is one of the earliest ones that he's written for Cynthia. And they start to record it, many flubs. They do takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When they get to take 7, George Martin says, I got an idea, because I want this to sound like you're recording it on stage in the Cavern Club. That was our original idea. Why don't you add some hand claps in there like you've done in some of your other songs? And John says, no. This is one time when he will not listen to George Martin. This is an emotional song. This is a love song. I don't want hand claps in there. And then George Martin says, how about after you sing the line, let me whisper in your ear, we add some ahs in there. And this time Paul says no. Paul says, that's going to be too schmaltzy. It's too sappy. I don't want ahs in there. So this one time on Do You Want to Know a Secret, they do reject what George Martin says to do. They record it just as they want to record it, and it is absolutely perfect for George Harrison's voice. Very heavy Scouse accent. You can hear him singing in that nasal back of the throat sound. It's enchanting. It's one of the best songs that he performs, and it is his song on this record that he performs for the Beatles. Now, we are almost up to that midpoint where we're going to stop, and we'll pick up next time, but it's 10 till 4 on the clock. They've been going nonstop because they didn't take a lunch break since 10 a.m., and George Martin wants to do some repair work. They're going to go back and they're going to record some of Taste of Honey again so that they can patch that in. They're going to record a little bit more. They're going to do the vocal overdubs on There's a Place. And then they're going to do one more take of 17 all the way through just to make sure that they've got what they need. And then they're going to go into what is considered the evening recording session. They're going to start at 4 o'clock with Misery, which will be our first song next time. And they're going to go all the way through to the magic, the ultimate magic of Twist and Shout, which will be the last song that they'll do. So that's where we're going to stop for this time. It's kind of fun, isn't it?
I'm amazed. And you know what? It's good that I know these things. Just I want to go back a bit on Do You Want to Know a Secret? George sings the song. That's right?
Yes.
But John writes it, yeah?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's John.
Was it put aside for George to sing it? Did George know he was going to sing that song? Or in the studio, did they say, George Martin said to him, you're going to sing it, George? I just want to clarify that.
No, he totally knew. He totally knew. And he had sung it before. It wasn't the first time that he performed it, of course. He was used to doing it, but John wrote it, and it's his song, but he writes it for George to be able to sing. And he does that many other times. Happy Just to Dance with You. You know, John wrote that song and gave it to George to sing. And it is, you know, that's a kind of tradition. They don't want George to write songs. In fact, Bill Harry encouraged George to write. He said, George, you're as good as they are. You can write your own songs. And George is like, oh, no, they don't want me to write any songs. And when they're in Bournemouth, some months later, George is down in his room writing Don't Bother Me when Paul knocks on the door and finds him writing Don't Bother Me. And he runs straight up to John's room and says, "You're not going to believe what George is doing. He's writing a song down there." And John says, "Who told him that he could?" I mean, they're very, thumb on him as far as writing his own songs. But, he goes ahead, writes Don't Bother Me, sings it, insists on singing and recording it. It's going to be a battle for George from then on out to get his songs heard and appreciated. But Bill Harry encouraged him to do it, and good for Bill Harry, because George writes some great. I mean, what would we do without George's songs?
Of course, but that's ironic that he says "Don't bother me." That's got a double meaning there when they're annoying him and he wants to write a song. So now that's got another meaning there. And he wrote some of the best songs in the world. Even Frank Sinatra told him, when you write something, that's the greatest love song in the world. He told him that, Frank Sinatra.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it amazes me that some of George's songs that he doesn't like, for example, For You Blue, are wonderful, wonderful love songs. And he doesn't always, I think he spent a lot of time being underappreciated. Of course, we know how that ends up on the White Album when he's singing Not Guilty and some of the songs where he's really getting back at them for pushing him down for so long. He's so frustrated. But yeah, at first, he's not allowed to write his own songs. John will write for him and then he'll be allowed to sing it, but not at first.
It's amazing. Today's episode, totally amazing. And just sitting back and listening to you describing what it is. And as I said, writing this book and then having someone that was actually there to correct it, it's like you're not going to find this anywhere else. And the great thing is with these shows, they might be condensed versions of your book, but these episodes are totally fascinating for when you don't have time. You can listen to this, buy the book, and then take your time as long as you want to go even more in depth. That's the great thing about these episodes now. I'm fascinated in this whole series. I actually can't wait for part 2 now.
It's going to be fun, and there's so much that happens. My very, very favorite scene, probably in Beatles history, is John Lennon at 10 o'clock at night, exhausted, sick, just worn to death, being tasked to record the hardest song he sings, Twist and Shout.
I'll give you a clue. He goes for the Zoobs.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. Takes his shirt off and sings without a shirt on. And I mean, it is, it took both Julia and Mimi to make John the way he was. Julia gave him his whimsical, creative, imaginative side, but Mimi gave him his determined, never give up, never say die. And those two women together made him who he was, because anybody else would have quit that night. Anybody else would not have sung that song as sick as he was, but he does.
Jude, all I want to say is this amazing. We brought it up to an hour, so now we know how it's going. So next week, we'll be doing now part 2, and I can't wait. We'll say goodbye to everyone, but as I said, just stay there, Jude, don't go. So from Plastic EP and the fabulous Jude Southerland Kessler, say goodbye to everyone, Jude, and we'll catch up with them next week.
All right, guys, check them out at johnlennonseries.com.
Make sure you buy the books. They're great. See you, Jude.